Hi, nurses. Welcome to Shift Change, the podcast for nurses who are ready to shift their thinking away from the just a nurse mentality and into claiming their position as powerful agents for change. I'm your host, Amy Deagle, Chief Nursing Officer and President of the International Network of Nurse Leaders. Our mission at the International Network of Nurse Leaders is to amplify the voice of nurses, inspire the new generation of nurse leaders, and lead a change revolution in the nursing profession. Everything we do is because we believe in the power of nurses to change the world. So let's get started. Hi, nurses. Welcome to another episode of the Shift Change podcast. We're doing another episode today with Sheena Howard. And if you haven't had a listen to the first two episodes that Sheena Howard did, you need to take a listen to them. She talks about her love-led leadership philosophy, and I just thought now with everything that's going on in the world, there's a lot of fear and anxiety and stress around COVID and nurses getting sick and not having enough PPE and just all of the stress and anxiety that's going on right now. I thought Sheena would be the perfect guest to bring on for a special episode. And so I'm so glad to be able to bring you her wisdom and her insight and just her calming presence. So Sheena Howard is a full-scope primary care registered nurse who was born and raised in Ontario. She graduated from Queen's University School of Nursing in 2003 and began her career in northern BC on an isolated island as a public health and primary care advanced practice nurse. Through a social justice lens, she worked alongside the community consisting of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to improve access to community health care, notably creating the first free birth control and prenatal group clinics, a model for prenatal patients in rural BC. So I am so excited to bring you Sheena's episode. She has created this amazing philosophy of love-led leadership, and we're going to dive into what that means and how you can use that in the time of COVID. And when you're looking for more information for Sheena, you can check out her website. It's sheenahoward.com, and we'll make sure that we have all of her information linked because if you resonate with her information and her philosophy as much as I do, then I know you're going to want to take a deeper look at her stuff. So without further ado, I bring you the episode with Sheena. So, Sheena, welcome back to the Shift Change podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I was just looking at our Skype log and realized August 20th was the first time we actually connected and chatted to record your first episode of the Shift Change podcast. And it didn't air till November, but hard to believe the changes we've seen since August.
Absolutely. There's been so much change that's happened since August. And I feel really grateful to know that you're still here and this podcast is still available to nurses, to everybody really, and that I just feel grateful for being invited back, excited to talk a wee bit more about love-led leadership, and also just to say, that I've missed talking to you.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, the amazing thing about this podcast is just the network of nurses that it's brought into my life. And I'm so honored to be able to call you a friend now as well. And, I was really struggling earlier this month and at the end of March on what to do because the podcast itself seems so fluffy in the time of COVID, for lack of a better word. And, it seems like it's nothing in comparison to what's going on in the world. And I had sent out a message, to some of the listeners just asking, do you think I should stop? And people said, no, we need some of this normalcy, but maybe let's have some different conversations. And so I thought, I really want to bring Sheena back on because what a better time than right now to really look at how love-led leadership can really start shifting not only the nursing culture, but also just the world in general. And it's so important just as nurses that we're showing up in this leadership style, not only ourselves in our personal lives, but also as we're leading in organizations and teams and colleagues and that sort of thing. So I'm grateful to have you back here today. And for those listeners that maybe didn't get a chance to hear your first podcast with us, can you just give them a little bit of an overview? And for those that have listened, quite some time ago, just a reminder of the definition and the pillars of love-led leadership?
Oh, for sure. For sure. Well, I just want to say I, for one, am glad you continued with the podcast. I was one of those people that really felt like we need nurses' voices now more than ever in the world, and to be able to amplify our voices and to be able to hear from nurses from different parts of the world and what they're doing and what they're saying is really important place to be able. It's really important to be able to have those conversations and to learn about different ways of leading. And so I'm personally really glad you did, because I get a lot out of it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. So, right. So a little bit of a reminder, or to share what the definition of love-led leadership is. So for me, I define love-led leadership as engaging in leadership practices that are guided by feelings of concern for others, that promote strong affection between people, and give rise to the dedication of others' well-being and the maintenance of their dignity. So, and the way in which the pillars that love-led leaders use are vulnerability, humility, accountability, passion, empathy, and authenticity. And they use all six of those in order to be able to, in their leadership practices, in order to promote the affection between people. And then that affection between people has the potential to create dedication. I'm just repeating what I said, but this ability to be dedicated to others' well-being and to be able to maintain their dignity. So essentially, love-led leaders are high on the high on the dignity quotient, which is, well, we can talk about that later, but essentially that's love-led leadership in a nutshell.
Amazing. And one of the big things I think that's so important right now is, in these times of chaos and uncertainty, is really owning your values and knowing where you stand on certain things and making sure that you're making decisions in truth of yourself. And I feel like love-led leadership is a framework to help with that too. Being that those pillars even just call that out in and of itself, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it really does embody your abilities to be able to use the values that are really important to you. In times like this, our values become really clear. Mm-hmm. Really, really clear. How do we want to show up for people? How do we want to show up for people that we're leading? How do we want to show up for our families, for ourselves? And love-led leadership can provide that framework to be able to ground you in expressing and utilizing and engaging in those values, for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, when we were talking outside of this call a week or so ago, it was, really about that personal leadership and personal responsibility. How do you hold your power in times of uncertainty? And how do you find control when you're having no control? And you had said, it's really that self-advocacy piece, and you control what you can. And you stay, firm in your values. And in reflecting on our conversation, I thought, I know part of the reason why I'm feeling so triggered and so in chaos is it's really bumping up against my value of freedom and choice. And, the threats of being redeployed or laid off, things that are outside of my control, really bump up against that value. And so, owning that authentically and being vulnerable about that, has just created so much more space in my life. So I thank you for that personal bit of coaching that we had. But I want to ask, how are you seeing nursing leaders use love-led leadership right now?
Well, first, you're welcome. I'm so glad you were able to get to that point. It's true. I think a lot of us who challenge the status quo all the time, who ask big questions, it is really rubbing up against our values of freedom and choice. And it takes a lot of guts, if you will, bravery to be able to go there. So way to go.
Thanks.
Awesome. You're welcome. So nurse leaders, how are they using love-led leadership right now? Well, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that across the globe, I think we're seeing an epidemic of love-led leadership. And, I think that the way we're fighting this pandemic is with an epidemic of love-led leadership. I don't think you can't look across any social media platforms or, hear stories from other people without hearing nurses engaging in love-led leadership. So they're doing things like advocating for PPE, personal protective equipment. They're committed to sharing only accurate information from trusted and valued sources, which is really important to help keep everybody informed and also to help keep panic down. Some of the things in Ontario I'm noticing and I'm seeing is demanding the support for our most vulnerable people. So in terms of the folks that are living in homelessness, how they're being housed and making sure that we're converting unused buildings to be able to make sure that people have a safe place to sleep. The government's been flowing more money into women's shelters and sexual assault centers, when nurses have been on the forefront of advocating for those things. And, I think I've seen lots of nurses at various levels engaging in proactive rather than reactive language and behaviors. So basically, their proactiveness is they like you were talking about in terms of their behaviors, they're a result of their own choice based on their values and their purpose, as opposed to a reactive point of view, which is, I hate this. This is somebody else's fault. The person who made this decision makes me so angry. We do go there, but I've been finding that the nurses who I've been speaking with have been engaging in that proactive language and behavior. They're asking questions like, what else is possible here? And they're saying things like, I will do this. I can do this. And things like, where has this come from for you? And how can I help you deal with this? Or where has this come from for me? And how can I deal with this for myself? As opposed to reacting in a reactive way, which is, having accusing attitudes, allowing yourself to be continually swayed by external stimuli or the conditions, and then allowing them to control you. So their thinking or their actions. So, the amount of time people are spending on social media and the things that we're reading and the things that we're hearing that can create a real reactive process for us. Love-led leadership, nurses engaging in love-led leadership have been taking a step back from that just to give themselves some space. And the other thing, which, I would argue doesn't necessarily lend itself to love-led leadership, but I've seen it work amazingly well, is engaging in command and control leadership in the correct context. So one of my mentees talked about it being like tough love, sort of, in that, they needed to engage in command and control type leadership because the context that we're dealing with is so chaotic. So that's the right time to use a command and control leadership style, when you're doing it from this place of we need to quell panic so that people can actually make decisions so that we can move forward. That's in itself, I think, a form of love-led leadership. And also, they've been able to notice when the shifts happen in their own organizations or in their own teams, where things have gone from a chaotic system back into a complex system. And they've been able to let go of that command and control style and start to be able to encourage and amplify innovation and creativity in their teams. Some of the most amazing things I've been noticing is also nurses are being quoted and asked for more media interviews. And I've seen amazing love, like the way that people are talking in those media interviews, to me, demonstrate a ton of love-led leadership. So you can see how, there's this push towards love-led leadership in nursing leadership actions that are affecting a huge amount of people across the world. And that's the definition of an epidemic. So from my perspective, we're seeing this epidemic of love-led leadership that we're using to fight this pandemic and fight people's anxiety and reactions to the pandemic.
Yeah,
does that answer your question?
Yes, and it's just ironic might not even be the right word, but it's just the World Health Organization designated 2020 as Year of the Nurse and the Midwife. And we had all these celebrations planned to celebrate our profession, but there was kind of this underlying piece of like, that's great to have these celebrations. And I mean, this was even the keynote I was supposed to be giving today, or yesterday actually, which obviously was canceled. And this message that I had was like, it's great to celebrate each other, and we need to do that because we make incredible contributions, but we also need to be having this larger conversation of really advancing the profession forward and enhancing our scopes of practice and getting into, the media and into government and having these discussions that change the way healthcare is delivered instead of just trying to fit in the same box that's always, been, or repackaging everything into a similar looking box. There needs to be no box, and that was really the conversations I was trying to have, starting the beginning of this year. Obviously, COVID has completely changed the landscape. Nursing is at the forefront of everybody's mind. Never has there been such an outpouring of love and support for nurses, whether that's the banging of the pots and pans or clapping. We saw it across all sorts of different countries. But the thing I want nurses to communicate and the public to remember is that when this is over, when we are post-COVID, don't let it go back to the way things were. We need to advance and evolve and push forward. And, that can happen in terms of nurse activists, getting their voice into government, voting a way that reflects a value of healthcare and support of nurses, all those sorts of things. So I hope that we're able to use this momentum and honestly, this visibility that nurses have right now due to this pandemic in the Year of the Nurse and the Midwife to actually make some changes on the other side of that, because I think right now is the time for innovation and creativity and being able to knock down those structures and advance things forward so that we are a stronger profession in the years to come.
Absolutely. And I just want to, I don't know if your listeners can hear, but I'm also at home with my boys. And so there might be some background noise of snack getting and water getting. So my apologies for that. So I was a little bit distracted from what you said because I was trying to wave at them to go away. But
that's all good. I was just ranting on. Don't worry.
No. I agree with you. The visibility of nurses is, we're seen every single day. Right? People see us. They've seen our work. They see what we do. They know what we do. We're one of the, top trusted professions in the world. And yet we're not seen or heard in a way that would foster, what's the word I'm looking for? Acute attention to us. Does that make sense? It's like, we're sort of all, doing this great work underground. It's like, yes, there's the nurses, and yes, we can't live without them. It's like, now they know, people understand, you're right, we cannot live without nurses.
Yeah. We
need to foster their mental health and their work and the respect we have for them, and we need to engage them as critical thinkers and policymakers, scientists, human people who are able to pattern human behavior, human choice, and elevate the profession, elevate us all, and ensure that we're at those tables to help make those decisions. I think that is one of the things that's going to come out of all of this. And I always hate to jump from when a door closes, a window opens, because I just find that's just really trite when people say that, and it's true. As much as I hate to admit it, this particular crisis, this chaotic crisis, is showing the world what nurses can do and also what we've endured.
Yeah, and I think it's a real act of, of love-led leadership, really, to the nurses that aren't involved in the frontline response to this. This is our time to pick up that torch and say, you know what, you guys have that fight, and we're going to carry on this fight so that at the end of this, we're stronger and better together. And we're going to be pushing our policymakers and our governments and having those tough conversations and using our voices, because that's what we can contribute right now if we're not on that frontline response. And I think there's been a surge of that, and people, especially in the U.S., we're hearing of gag orders and, nurses not being allowed to speak out about the PPE situations or the situations in their hospitals, and their colleagues, not their colleagues in the same organization, but nursing colleagues in the general, in Canada, in the UK, are saying, you know what, we'll raise these issues. We're going to bring attention to this for you. And I love the camaraderie that we're seeing across nurses across the globe coming together and speaking out strong with that one voice about these issues that matter. And I think that's
where the passion is of love-led leadership, right? It's this passion and this authentic response to the suffering of our colleagues in other countries. Yeah. It's, I sometimes feel as nurses, we can see the suffering, but can't help but respond. That's where the passion is. And to be able to do that is such a gift for another nurse. But I think it really blows that whole nurses eat their young, or nurses, are catty or whatever, just right out the window. Because this is how we come together as a collective whole, as a profession, as a global profession.
Yes.
This is what we were, Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that is a piece too of that saying, like, I don't want to backslide to where we were. I don't want those cultures to come back. Let's move forward. Let's advance. Let's create the better piece. So, I'm hearing, even for my own self, COVID in and of itself is so emotionally draining. Being a leader and a manager in this situation, being a frontline worker in this situation, it is just exhausting. So is asking a nurse leader or nurses in general to engage in love-led leadership, is that going to be even more emotionally draining for them to use right now?
So to be honest, no. I actually think it's emotionally uplifting. I think that engaging in love-led leadership, it's our time to shine, and it's our time to role model how strong and uniting love-led leadership can be. And, the pillars of love-led leadership have been demoted to the realm of soft leadership skills. And we're seeing the real positives of this method in leadership. And when we engage in the pillars of love-led leadership, so there's more compassion, there's more empathy, we're more creative, we engage in what we can in terms of quality. How do we continue to provide quality human resource support, and also quality patient care, safe patient care? It also, those pillars help us, when we engage in them, they also help to promote freedom and courage. And so when we see people doing this, so when we engage as love-led leaders like this with the world, with people, whoever's in front of us, whoever our teams are, and they're seeing us engage in authenticity, humility, empathy, passion, vulnerability, and accountability, we activate their mirror neurons. So, the things that are in our brain that, somebody smiles at us, we smile at them. Somebody yawns, we yawn, those types of things. Those mirror neurons are activated, and people engage in what we want, what we're putting back out. And then we see them doing that, and our mirror neurons are activated. And we're recipients of the actions from others just from showing up as love-led leaders. So we're emotionally buoyed. Our teams, our colleagues, our patients are emotionally buoyed. And it just goes back and forth, and it's really reciprocal. So I don't actually think it's emotionally draining at all. Yeah. I feel more, when I choose to engage in this way and I see the reactions in people, I can't help but feel more, I feel better. I feel more engaged, more joy, even in a situation like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would agree, absolutely, just for myself, too, coming back to those pillars, being authentic and showing, that you are vulnerable and that this is not everyday like normal. There's that piece that removes some of that armor almost that we have to wear, and it makes it you get to set it down for a while, and it just doesn't feel so heavy to be wearing that. So I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
You know,
you're right. We either choose the armor or we choose to take it off.
mm-hmm.
And right now, I think more of us are choosing to take our armor off, to say this is unprecedented.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the next step is, but we're going to figure this out together, and I'll give you all the information I have, and
mm-hmm.
we'll go from here.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, again, we alluded to this. I've wrestled with this. Colleagues that I've talked to recently, same thing, are wrestling with this nursing guilt. You know, either they're not in frontline positions and wishing they could be in the fight, or they're hoping like hell that they don't get called up to the front line. They don't want to be redeployed, you know, and they're feeling guilty about that. They're feeling guilty about not wanting to go into work. They're feeling guilty about not returning, like that they want to choose to leave the profession and just not be a nurse at all. You know, the range of nursing guilt is, you know, from not being involved to not wanting to be involved and everything in between. And and you can swing back and forth in the same day between both ends of the pendulum, you know, and there's also this guilt of admin who can't get the right support, whether that's, you know, mental health supports or PPE supports or whatever for their team. So what would you say to those nurses who are dealing with that guilt, those nurses and those managers?
Right. Well, I'd love to give them a great big hug.
Wouldn't it be nice to just hug somebody again? Oh, man.
I know. The guilt I feel for just even wanting to have face-to-face human interactions. You know, I think I like how you said I vacillate between, you know, being grateful that I'm able to be at home with my children and also feeling just this immense guilt and shame around not being on the front lines. Yeah, absolutely. So I had a really great online conversation in my Love-Led Leadership Facebook group with one of my mentors, Johnny Van Aerd. He's written a really great article about this very thing, about guilt for the Canadian Society of Physician Leaders. And I really agreed with him about the importance of self-awareness in the moment between stimulus and response. So it's in that moment that we can see we have no control over anything, really. Like, we can see that we have not that we don't have any control over anything, but what we don't have control over and what we can control and influence. And so we can know that we're feeling guilty when we're saying things like, I can't stop, I have to, I must, I should, I can't, or I won't. And we know we're experiencing shame when we're saying, I'm not helping enough or working enough or being or leading or trying or intelligent enough, or some versions of some of those things. And I think it's really important to assess what we can control and influence, because that's where we're going to make the biggest difference in our feelings of guilt and shame. And, you know, I'd suggest that the nurse leaders or any nurse who's experiencing guilt or shame take a moment after this podcast and examine what they have no control over, and identify what they do have direct control over and what they can influence indirectly, and then write them down, because that's how you're going to be able to sort through where your guilt and shame is, how you can manage it, or at least how to separate out some of these things. And so, for example, you have control over your own thoughts and how you express your mood or your energy, and this affects your team and your approach towards patients and others. And you can also influence others' thinking and actions. And my mentor, Dr. Van Aerd, he offered this example of encouraging curiosity, which enables creativity. And we can do this by asking questions instead of offering solutions. So we can influence others simply by engaging in love-led leadership and engaging in and living out the pillars of love-led leadership. That's kind of how I feel about the guilt, you know, that I really encourage nurses to be able to, and nurse leaders to be able to do that. What can we influence? What can we control? What do we have direct control of? And then what do we have no control over? We have no control over whether or not Trump decides he's going to give us all of those things from 3M, the N95s from 3M, whether he's going to stop that shipment. Those are the things that we can't control. But what we can control is in our sphere, how we prevent people from stealing them. Right? Like, I'm just using examples, but that's what I would say to the nurses, is that we only have indirect influence, and we can only control ourselves.
Yeah, and it comes back to that personal responsibility piece and knowing yourself, knowing where those values are, and then making a decision that is in line with those values. At the end of the day, the only thing you can control is yourself and your reaction to the situations, and it's hard right now, and it's bringing a lot of stuff up for people. But it's still true. The personal responsibility, you can only control yourself and your reactions.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to feel guilt or shame. Both can be true. You can examine those things you can control and influence, and you can also feel guilt and shame. It's just you've contextualized it, and you've allowed yourself the process of being able to admit there's things you don't have any control over.
Yeah, I agree. Hey nurses, I just wanted to take a quick break from the podcast and tell you about something really important that's happening. So 2020 has been designated as Year of the Nurse and the Midwife. And it's really great to be celebrating nurses and to be sharing trending hashtags. But what we really need to do is get into action, because it's up to us. And nothing is going to change if we don't make the change. So there's a movement happening, and it needs you. We're stronger together. So come join us as we disrupt the status quo and evolve our profession. It's time. We are stronger together, so let's get started. If you want to know how you can join this movement of change, visit nurseleaders.ca/2020nurse to opt in for a free 3-part video series about how we can use 2020, the Year of the Nurse and Midwife, as the year we finally use our collective voice and lead our profession forward. So jump over to nurseleaders.ca/2020nurse for all the details. Now back to the episode. So, one of the things I'm really concerned about is nurses were burned out and exhausted before this hit.
Oh boy. Yeah.
It's only going to get worse. I worry about a mass exodus out of the profession when this is over, because nurses have felt disposable and devalued. I really hope that, like I said, the nurses not directly involved in frontline efforts right now can be the voice and the champion for our colleagues and move things ahead at policy and government levels so that things are different, post-COVID life. But for those nurses that are feeling even more burned out right now, how can they use love-led leadership for themselves?
Well, okay. So thanks for the question. Well, for me, when you examine the literature around burnout, you can see that it has some of its roots in comparative suffering. So when comparative suffering is when we limit our examination of, or we disavow our own needs and wants because they're somehow less than or not as worthy as other people's. And we can see this really clearly right now when we hear people say things like, I've been laid off, but it's not as bad as my brother-in-law who's losing his business, or because at least I get EI, right? Which I found myself saying when I was laid off from my job last week. I devalued my own experience around the layoff, and well, at least I'm not like that person who's losing their business. Or when we say things like, I'm scared, but it's not as bad as my friend who's been on the front lines. She has a right to be scared. Or I watched my teammate die of COVID, but there's so many others who have seen a family member die. Or why did they die and not me? And, when we engage in comparative suffering or undervalue our feelings, our capacity to empathize decreases. And I just want us to let that sink in for a little bit. When we engage in comparative suffering or undervalue our feelings, our capacity to empathize decreases, and we have less ability to lead, to be love-led leaders. And frankly, the world needs us now, and we need us now more than ever. We need ourselves now more than ever. And so I think I would suggest that the very thing we need to do is lead ourselves with love-led leadership. And I think we can do this by and help to prevent the burnout that we're experiencing by engaging in the practice of be love-led. I've used this practice to help myself recover from burnout, and I've used it with huge success in my private coaching and mentorship sessions with clients. And the be love-led practice can be used at the bedside and boardroom in decision making, and it's also for engaging in our own self-leadership. So I'd like to kind of go through it with you, if that's okay. And I don't think anybody needs to write all this out. I'm going to share the Be Love-Led Framework checklist, so you'll have that to refer to, so your listeners can be able to print it off and be able to follow along. But Love-Led stands for listen, observe, value, express, learn, explore, and decide. So be love-led. And so, for example, or if I'm just to outline each of them. So the listen is listening to what you're saying about yourself or others. When you're observing your external cues, what you're doing, what you're engaging in that might be worrisome for yourself or others, or what you're not engaging in that might be worrisome for yourself. Value, so remind yourself of what your top 3 values are. And then express. So reaching out to a coach, a mentor, a trusted member of your own inner circle, and share with them what you've been saying and observing. And then if you think that these things are in line with the values that you're holding. And then learn. So after the discussion, writing down your reflections about what you've learned from the interaction with this trusted person. And then explore. So explore with compassion and curiosity what you have control over and what you can influence. Explore those pieces and then decide. Decide what specific activities you need to put in place that will help you manage your guilt or shame, and ask yourself which comes first. So you can repeat this Be Love-Led process as many times as you need. And it's also really helpful when you're experiencing some kind of stimulus that's activated a really strong emotional response. You can remind yourself, be love-led. And then you can create just enough space for you to respond so that you can act proactively. You can have a proactive response rather than a reactive response. And I found that engaging in that process of Be Love-Led allows people to be able to get really clear about what it is they want to do and how it is they want to recover from their own burnout. Ideally, you're doing it along with some other folks, or you're doing it with somebody who's familiar with the process, but that you can do it on your own and you can be able to engage in that way. So at least you have a visual of what you can do to help prevent or recover from the burnout that you're feeling. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So, Sheena, you mentioned this framework will be available to listeners. I'm sure there are people right now saying, like, yes, this is what I need. How do I learn more? Can you let them know how they work with you with that coaching, with the mentorship, with just the Be Love-Led framework? Just tell somebody who's interested in knowing more how they can work with you.
Oh, sure. So you can go to my website at sheenahoward.com, and there's a number of different ways. There's a workbook, that'll be available specifically on using the Be Love-Led framework for difficult times, and so that's available. So you can do that independently. But I also offer coaching and mentorship for healthcare emerging and existing healthcare leaders that want to engage in this way. I have that available. And then within the next couple of months, there's going to be a couple of different courses that will be discussing love-led leadership, but also the Be Love-Led framework as well. So that'll be coming. So lots of different ways to engage in the framework independently with me walking beside you on the journey, and also through the courses as well. Mm-hmm.
Great. And I mean, if anybody has any questions, like, please reach out to us. But Sheena has been a community mentor in the International Network of Nurse Leader membership community a couple different times, and is always raved about. And, you just have such an ability to get to the heart of the matter and really help people work through things and show up as themselves. And so it's such an amazing gift. So I hope if anybody has any questions or has an inkling that this is something they want to explore more, that they reach out to you. We'll make sure your website is linked in the show notes as well, so that they can just click on that piece. It'll be available on the blog, because we really do need a love-led leadership epidemic now more than ever. So how can we capitalize on this current push towards love-led leadership embedded in our work cultures, our organizational leadership, after all of this is over?
That's a really big question. So, my hope is that it'll just happen organically, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think it needs to be really structured. So one of the hardest things to do is to examine your organization from a outsider's point of view, to be able to look at what they're saying about you. And there's all kinds of tools you can use for this. Like, Indeed.com, the ratings of like what it's like to work at your organization, those are all over the place. The different, like, rate your nurse or rate your organization or rate your experience, those types of things, to get a sense about how you were doing pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. That's really hard. But then you'll have an understanding about what, really those are people that aren't replying to your surveys and your suggestions. I think your suggestion boxes, right? They're doing this independently. And then I would encourage folks to be able to go in person to the floors. So people in leadership positions, managers, and ask how your employees felt when they felt heard and seen and supported through COVID. Who did what and what did they do? And then, of course, you can always use, if you can't go in person or they are unable to speak with you, you can also ask them to give you email suggestions or fill out a survey for sure. But if they've spoken to you or they filled out the survey, then find a creative way to thank them. Extend a benefit or extend a lunch or something like that to say thank you for being able to tell us what made you feel heard and seen and supported. And then take the most doable suggestions and make them mandatory for all your formal leaders. One of the things I've heard about is the relief it has. The most amazing things for people have been when leaders have shown up on their floors or shown up in their organizations, and they've gotten right on the front lines and talked to people, that they felt seen, heard, respected, and supported. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, that would be the easiest thing to roll into somebody's role. This isn't just a suggestion. This is actually this is mandatory for you to do. And I think that would go a long way. And I would also, I think that we can capitalize on this push by building in mentorship and coaching and online courses that can help staff learn how to lead themselves, and let them choose their own mentors and coaches and courses, and then pay for those sessions or courses. Because we can't, the only way we're going to get through this is if we can rely on ourselves. The external stuff is incredible, but we need to be able to lead ourselves through this and to be able to work our way through to make sure that we're not burned out and that we're capitalizing on all that love-led leadership. We need to be able to put some actionable things in there and allowing people to choose who they're mentored by and the courses they want to use. That would go a long way. And then also publicly accepting responsibility for the decisions and choices that needed to be made. That these decisions and choices were the choices of the folks that needed to make those decisions, the higher ups that had to deal with rationing of certain things and choosing who stayed on ventilators or not. So that transparency, that ownership, that accountability is really important. And also in talking about love-led leadership to your colleagues and, your teams and staff, hosting online and face-to-face forums, lunch and learns, general meetings, rounds, I guess, on the pillars of love-led leadership and the love-led leadership framework. When it gives folks the words to use to build clarity and awareness around love-led leadership. And also, some people find the word love uncomfortable to be used in the leadership, in the role of leadership. But what we're seeing now is examples where love is being used to build affection between people, but not the kind of affection that would harm somebody, right? And so giving them that clarity and awareness can be really helpful. And then the tools on how to implement it in their personal and professional leadership with consistency. So how you continue to engage others in love-led leadership and engage yourself. And then, of course, I'd always recommend that people take the love-led leadership manifesto, which is also on my website. And I think, we can link that as well, and post it in prominent places. Ask people to have conversations about it, and then also create a love-led leadership declaration and ask key leaders and nurses to sign it and post it on social media, post it at their desks. And then if they are posting it out in the world, to tag the organization and say, I'm declaring that I'm a love-led leader and I commit to using it from now on. I've seen the power of it. I've seen how we can engage in this. I've seen the difference it can make, and I'm signing on to being a love-led leader and commit to engaging in it in all my future leadership interactions and just day-to-day interactions and for myself. Yeah. So those are, I don't know how many suggestions, but I think that we can capitalize on it. I don't think it has to go back to being the way that it was. That's one of the beauties of a system that is reinventing itself as we speak, right? We're letting the old die off to make room for the new, and not like love-led leadership is new, but the collective push, this global sharing of love and engagement with each other, that amount of push is new. So I really do believe we can capitalize on it for sure.
And one of the things I just thought of is one of the myths around love-led leadership is that it's, that creepy, touchy-feely, unwelcome right? Like if some people, yes. And it's that's not what love-led leadership is. And how phenomenal that love-led leadership and these pillars are having a resurrection in a moment in time right now when socially distancing and physically distancing, maybe is a better way to put it, is paramount. So you can have this love-led leadership. It is not the creepy, touchy-feeling piece. We want to hammer that home. It's not inappropriate behaviors or touching or anything like that.
It's not a license to harm.
Correct.
Love-led leadership is not a license to harm, right? It's a license to help.
Yes. And I want to drill that point home that, during this time of physical distancing where we can't even, hug extended family members that aren't within our homes, we're still having a surgence of this love taking over, and how do we show affection and appreciation, maybe a different way to put it, for our colleagues.
That's right. And how do we make decisions, really hard decisions, in love, in love-led leadership? How do you make these decisions that are vulnerable and authentic and promote accountability and are, we're seeing so many people. I think the chief medical officer here, Dr. Tam, that's her name, the way that she's been able to pivot and, say, yes, you're right. I recommended this, but as the information becomes clearer, I'm sharing it with you, and then we have to change our advice, because that's what you do in a chaotic environment. Because you have to be able to pivot. And so even when we can't physically touch each other, we can't really engage in our energies, we can still be making decisions and still being engage people with love in all different forms of leadership, no matter where you stand or where you sit. Yeah.
I love it. Well, Sheena, thank you for taking the time again to be here today. Like I said, we'll make sure all of your stuff is linked in the show notes and on our website as well, so that they can go check out all of your great work. And like I said, to anybody listening, just make sure if you have questions or you have even just an inkling of wondering if this is the right fit for you, reach out to Sheena. She is a wonderful person and can help you on your leadership journey for sure. So again, thank you, Amy,
for
your leadership.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Everybody out there, I hope you're staying safe. I appreciate all of your efforts in this battle, and can't thank.
Be love led.
Yes, I can't thank nurses enough so much. We will talk to everybody again soon. Bye.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you loved the advice shared on this episode, we would be so grateful if you would let us know. Please head over to Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes, and subscribe to our show, and then rate us and leave your review. We would be so grateful if you would take the time to subscribe, rate, and review. While you're on our website, nurseleaders.ca/connect, all of our social media handles are there, and we would love to get to know you on social media as well. Thank you again for listening today, and remember, nurses, we have the power to change the world. Let's start today.